Hey, welcome to this week's edition of the Ride Along Radio Show. Today is December 7th, 2017, which is, of course, Pearl Harbor Day, and we'll talk about that in a second. But let me do my intro. I'm George Holt. I was a policeman for 25 years, working in Southern California, all over the city of Los Angeles, working from the housing projects to the international terminals of the airport. So I got to see all kinds of stuff, and I got to work all kinds of assignments. I have some guests with me tonight, and I'm going to start off with the man to my right, who is retired police lieutenant from Oklahoma City, and I'm going to let Stanley Campbell do his own introduction.
I'm Stan Campbell, retired lieutenant from Oklahoma City Police Department, 20 years retired. I was on a SWAT team for 10 years. 15 years I trained police officers in use of force and 4 police academies.
All right, and to my left is Attorney Don West, who is a guy who was on the national spotlight some years ago, and I guess still is to a certain extent. And he's going to be talking to us tonight about some legal stuff. We're going to be getting into self-defense and self-defense strategies and what to do if you have to use force to protect yourself, whether that's with a gun, a knife, or a cement squirrel. Or you remember that?
That's right. Well, thank you.
Or whatever it is. But I'm going to let Don give you his background in terms of his legal history and education, and et cetera, et cetera.
Sure, thanks. I've been a lawyer in Southeast, for the most part, Florida, admitted in federal court, Florida state courts for about 36 years now. I've been board certified as a criminal trial specialist. That's something I'm very proud of course. You have to take a test. You have to get references and recommendations from lawyers and judges and a certain number of trials, a certain number of years of experience, and it's a specialty that's recognized, and in fact, you're allowed to call yourself a specialist.
I didn't know they had that.
Yeah, surprising, isn't it?
Yeah, I didn't know attorneys had like levels like that. I thought you just went into your specialty. I didn't know you had like different certifications.
Yeah,
like we're SWAT guys, right? So we did that. So you're like the SWAT guy of the legal profession, right?
That's right.
It doesn't require necessarily graduate courses, although they want you to take a lot of continuing legal education. It's really a demonstration of skill and experience and acknowledgement within the community.
Sure.
My practice has been mostly private practice. I've also worked at the PD's office, state and federal, and I've had a criminal trial practice since the beginning. That's all I've ever done.
Oh, wow. Really? You didn't do any time as like a DA or PD or anything like that?
PD. As a public
PD.
Defender, I did that early on, and never been a prosecutor.
Okay. Outstanding. You know, it's funny because when I was looking at going to finish my degree and going to law school, only thing I wanted to do was be a prosecutor. You know, that was kind of what I was looking at. That or entertainment law. I know that sounds like a wide disparity, but those are only 2 things that interested me. I had no interest at all in doing anything else. And I know I had friends who went on to become corporate attorneys or whatever, people I went to high school with, et cetera. And that just wasn't something that I was looking at doing. And being a former police officer, I could not see myself going into being a defense attorney. But then I met Daryl Munger and Mike Stone and all those other guys who had been police officers who had gone on to then become criminal defense attorneys, and those guys were oftentimes defending cops. That's how I met them. Sure. Because they were defending cops who were accused of either misconduct within the department, just breaking rules, or actually breaking laws. And
well, it's funny how you make those kinds of career choices. You know,
right.
Some of them are absolutely goal-directed, and you know what you want to do, and other times you just kind of take a left when you meant to take a right. Or
well, yeah, but when you get in there and you start seeing what it is, and you learn more about it, right? But I was looking at prosecutor. By the time I was already a sergeant with the police department, and I figured out that I didn't want to take a pay cut. I didn't want to go to law school for a couple of years only to take a pay cut. So I said, I'm good. I'm not, because the prosecutors aren't making it, especially in the LADA's office. Entry-level prosecutors not making what a police sergeant's making. So.
Well, my story was I interviewed with the prosecutor's office, and they offered me a job, but it was in a satellite office an hour or farther from my house. And he said, by the way, the public defender's across the street, and they've got some openings.
Oh, okay. So
walked across
there's
the
your left. So you're right.
Exactly.
You took, right? Wow, that would have been a whole different life, man. You never know.
Then I fell in love with the courtroom, and it doesn't really matter if you want to develop your skills as a courtroom advocate. I think you can do the right thing on either side.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And, and people don't realize that Johnny Cochran actually started out as a prosecutor and then became, this great defense lawyer. So we have a couple of, well, let me get back to Pearl Harbor Day before we get into our comments. So today's Pearl Harbor Day, 76 years ago today that Japan declared war on the United States by a sneak attack, basically, at Pearl Harbor Naval Base in Hawaii. And if you've ever got a chance to go out there, it's very moving. I went out there when I was a kid. My mom took me to Hawaii, and we went out there. But then I went back as an adult, and I actually spent some time at the Marine Corps base, Kaneohe Bay. They call it K-Bay out there. And not only is Pearl Harbor itself there, but there's like little markers all over Kaneohe Bay. And I saw a boulder with a plaque on it. And I asked one of the Marines, I go, hey, man, what's that all about? He said, that's where one of the Japanese Zeros crashed after we shot it down. And when it crashed, and I guess they just pulled the dude up out of there, pulled his body out, and just dropped a boulder on it and put a placard on it. This is one of the Zeros we shot down last time they came over here, And there's like little remnants of that all over the place. But it's just a very moving thing. And it was the first big surprise attack in this nation's history. And it was something that really cemented that we were going to go and jump into World War II, And that was 76 years ago today. That's
crazy.
That is, And there's still some survivors, oddly enough. One of the guys I work with on the police department, he was a naval guy, a naval diver, 30 years in the Navy before he became a policeman. And he was on the team, that when you're a Pearl Harbor survivor, when you die, you have the option of being cremated, and then they will take your ashes and put them in an urn. It's actually a howitzer shell urn, and they will take that dive team and they will go out to the smokestack of, I think, Arizona, and they will drop the ashes down in the smokestack so you can be buried with your shipmates.
Wow.
Because all those bodies are still down there. They didn't go and recover any bodies from the water at Pearl Harbor. There's that whole sailors thing of let the sea have their dead. Or let the sea have its dead is what sailors say, right? So all those guys are still down there. They're entombed down there at Pearl Harbor. So it's just one of those really emotional kind of experiences when you go there. Even if you don't think you're particularly patriotic, you can't help but be overcome by the gravity of that. When I was out there last, I was working security for a rap group, okay? And these guys are like, this ain't, it wasn't a Fresh Prince. These were like, like hardcore kind of rap group. And
real rap group,
right? So we're out there, they're doing a show or whatever, and we're early to the show, and the driver says, hey, we're early, what do you guys want to do? And they said, well, let's go see some stuff. He goes, well, there's Pearl Harbor right there. It was closed, though. So, but I had been there before, and I had studied up on it. I tell you when it was. It was when the year that Pearl Harbor movie came out with Josh Hartnett. So we go out there, and there's Pearl Harbor billboards all over the place. Everybody's interest is piqued. And I'm explaining to them what I just said about the Japanese came in this way, and the ship sailors, the sailors are still down there on the sunken ships. And as I'm saying this, I turn around and look at them, and they're all looking at me like little kids in school.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, man, this is a surreal. They were like really digging and asking questions and everything. I was like, I wouldn't have expected that. But the story, I guess, is not my storytelling. Believe me, it's the story itself. It's so captivating. And for them to be there, and you can see the Arizona Monument out in the distance, and them to know that ship is still down there, they were like really like moved by it. And that's what illustrated for me that I don't care who you are, that story is a very touching story, especially if you're out there taking that energy in of the place. So if you haven't been to Pearl Harbor, you definitely should go. It's one of those places. You go out to Hawaii and you go to Oahu, make sure you hit Pearl Harbor. Well, we had some. Last show we did was last week. I had Jasmine Canick here, who was a political and social issues commentator, and we talked about the Cameron Terrell case, which is the case of the affluent white teenager from Rancho Palos Verdes, who decided he was going to become a member of the Rolling 90s Crips down here in South L.A. He did this, and he ends up being involved in a drive-by shooting. It killed somebody. And so now he's on trial for murder. His two co-defendants were minors. He drove the car, but they were minors, so they got no bail. He got, I think it was $5 million bail, and his family posted it because he had that kind of money. They had that kind of money.
Wow. And
he goes right back to school, and he's in high school now until the parents protested, and of course he's out. So we covered that whole story and the whole disparity of the justice system and how cash bail is unfair, and blah, 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 right? We covered it pretty good, and we got some feedback from Ride Along Radio Show, longtime listener and longtime commentator, Willie Sweet Wonka Joe. And Willie Sweet says, in the case of Cameron Terrell, George, I've been telling you and Gilberto that the American justice system is fair to the wealthy, but is designed to exploit profits from the poor. The American justice system is just another branch of capitalism. And, there was a time where I would have dismissed that out of hand. But as you see, when people have money, it's a little different than when they don't have money.
Absolutely.
And we talked about that last night briefly, right? So if you have money to pay for a competent legal defense, you're going to get a different shape. Even from being able to bail out and be at home. Since the murder went down, this kid's been at the World Series at the Dodger games. His two co-defendants haven't been. They've been in custody. But again, they're juveniles anyway. Yeah. But had they not been juveniles, they probably would still be sitting in custody. But, even with everything we've seen with celebrities or people who have money, basically, they don't really go to prison like people who don't have money.
That's correct.
Go to prison. So I would have disagreed with you, Willie Sweet, until about 5 years ago, I guess, when I really started paying attention to that kind of thing. Because before, man, when I was still in the game, before I retired, I didn't care anything about that. My whole thing was, out there in these streets and you cut no slack, hook 'em, book 'em, and don't look back.
Yeah.
And I didn't care what happened to people after I arrested them. I didn't care if you were found guilty or not. I didn't care. My job was to arrest you and put you in the system, and whatever happened to you happened.
I was the same way coming up, and I was talking to Don on the way down here. I started when I was 21 years old as a policeman, so cop for life.
Right.
But I learned more from being around Don about the criminal justice system than I actually knew as a police officer.
Sure.
Because I really, at that point, it was like when I'm finished with my report, I'm done.
Yeah. Right. I didn't really care about what went on.
Yeah. So. We do get pulled into that. And then, once I moved into actually the defense side of things with CCW Safe for concealed carriers, you start to look at things a little bit different.
Absolutely. And I totally get that, man. And it makes sense because then you see, there's two sides. Every incident's got two sides. And, we only see it from the one side. But again, I guess I call myself being impartial about it because I wouldn't hang around to find out what the verdict was. I wouldn't hang around to find out how much time the guy got.
Correct.
I didn't care. I was pretty callous about it.
I can give you an example. I think where having the funds to for your defense, having the money to get out of jail, is critically important. Not so you can go to a World Series game, not so you can go to a concert or hang with your friends, but so you can help your lawyer prepare the case. We were involved in a case recently where CCW Safe member was involved in a lethal self-defense case and had a $500,000 bond. He probably couldn't have posted that on his own. It would have taken $50,000 cash for collateral and all of that. We helped him get out of jail. He must have spent, what do you think, Stan, 200 hours, 500 hours? Yeah. With the lawyers, reviewing material, reviewing discovery, helping locate witnesses.
And he wouldn't have had access to attorneys. Even though attorneys can come down to the jail and everything, it's not the same as being able to,
All the jail calls are recorded. There's no real effective way to communicate as a lawyer with your client in jail unless you go there.
Right.
And there's physical and practical limits to that.
Sure, absolutely.
You can't take everything inside with you. Some jails won't let you take your computer with you.
Really?
Things like that. Sure, cell phones. Ways that we work every day.
Sure. Wow. Well, now we're talking about CCW Safe. Can you give everybody kind of just a heads up on what CCW Safe is and the service you guys provide?
Absolutely. So CCW Safe is a legal service membership plan for citizens, for military, off-duty police officers, and those who carry concealed and also defend themselves at home. And we are membership based, as you pay usually a yearly fee, and it's just $179 a year, and we take care of all of your criminal, civil, administrative issues that follow a lethal force situation.
Well, and there's some cases where you guys have done just that, and we're gonna get into that. But I do want to, since we're talking about CCW right now, CCW stands for Carry Concealed Weapon. Correct. It's a permit. Sometimes in certain states it's called a concealed handgun license, a CPL, concealed pistol license, or whatever. But basically, it's carry a concealed weapons permit. It's what allows you to carry a handgun, usually concealed on your person, in your vehicle, out in public, et cetera. There was a case recently. Actually, it's not even a case. It's a law that's actually going through the process right now. The nationwide CCW reciprocity bill, and this bill basically would allow those who have concealed weapons permits in their home state to then have that same privilege extended no matter where they travel in the country. The premise being, just like your driver's license is good in any state. Like I'm flying to Pennsylvania tonight, and when I get there, I'm going to rent a car, and I'm going to be able to drive around Pennsylvania on my California driver's license.
Correct.
Because I have a valid license from my home state. And this is the same principle. They want to extend this to the right to carry, or the privilege to carry concealed, to have your license valid in all states. So we're going to show a quick video on that, on the nationwide CCW reciprocity bill. And then I want to discuss that because I have some thoughts about it, and I have some questions about it too. And if you've got thoughts or questions after the video, you can call in at 323-293-3375.
And here to discuss now, Dana Lash, radio show host, NRA spokesperson, along with Paul Violas, the security brief host, and Violas Group International. Dana, this is, of course, a topic that is very near and dear to your heart. You've been pushing for this for a long time. Not only are Democrats criticizing it, but so are Republicans in the Senate, saying it's going to make it harder to pass anything on background checks. What are your thoughts?
Well, Charles, and thank you for discussing this issue. I'm very excited that this passed through the House, and of course, this also has to get through the Senate. Unfortunately, there is a misinformation campaign that has been in full effect for the past few days that is misleading some very well-intentioned individuals, some of those who share the same side of the political ideological aisle with myself and millions of gun owners all across America, and they're being misled as a result of this. What this does is it actually reinstates our rights. I mean, our Second Amendment natural rights. My right to self-defense shouldn't end where the state boundary line ends. Some of the other things that I keep hearing about this particular bill, the Fix NICS bill, as well as the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act, Charles, on this, is that somehow this is going to create new restrictions of prohibited possessors, which it absolutely does not. In fact, the only individuals, Charles, that are going to be included on this are those who are already convicted and who are prohibited possessors under current law. So this is a good thing, and I just hate to see fake news attempt to derail a really good chance that we've been working on for 30 years to get our rights reinstated.
Well, just moments ago, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi even slamming this Republican bill in a statement that read in part, Republicans are inviting violent criminals, domestic abusers, convicted stalkers, and those who have never undergone a background check or received any gun safety training the green light to carry their concealed weapons wherever they want. This extreme bill also overrides state and local laws that protect people in daycares, K-12 schools, shopping malls, movie theaters, parks, and other public places from concealed weapons. Paul, we know criminals always get weapons, which makes it would be laughable if it wasn't so disingenuous, I think, that statement.
I completely agree, Charles. And I agree with what Dana said. She's absolutely right with respect to the reciprocity bill. What I have a problem with is that this, by loading up the background bill, it allows the Democrats in the Senate to defeat this, and that's my concern. Both should have stayed on the road merits. My biggest issue that I have with respect to the backgrounds is we lack content validity in the manner in which we are conducting background checks right now. That's a fact. It's not debatable. Now, we should let that pass, and then once that's done, move forward with reciprocity. I really think that we've rolled the dice here, and the risk is far too great. When it gets to the Senate, it's highly questionable whether this is going to pass now.
What are your thoughts on, Dana, on Nancy Pelosi's statements? Pretty hard and some damning convictions of people who believe in Second Amendment rights.
Yes, it's awful what she said, and it's completely ignorant of law. I mean, right now we know 18 U.S.C. Section 922 already states that domestic abusers are considered prohibited possessors. So I would encourage her to read the law that she has been elected to uphold as well as administer in Washington, D.C., Charles. But to the effect on background checks, the background check system is only as good as the records submitted to it. And unfortunately, we've had far too many states, 38, that have submitted less than 80% of these criminal convictions into the system, which leaves millions of criminal convictions out there in the dark. That's how Sutherland Springs happened, and that's how a ton of other massacres took place, because people, Charles, who were supposed to be compliant and were not compliant, contributed to this. And it should not be the fault of the law-abiding American who are trying to get these elected officials to be compliant. They're the ones that have kind of dropped the ball here. So this Fix NICS bill is looking at remedying that. And Charles, one more quick point, if I may. One of the other accusations that I've heard about the Fix NICS bill and the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act is that somehow it's going to make it to where individuals cannot get their name after it has been erroneously included on this. False. And in fact, the truth on this is that this Fix NICS bill actually gives the process. Individuals can get their names on it, off of it, and it gives government a deadline to where they have to remedy this. We did not have that before.
Dana, always appreciate your passion, and Paul, you as well. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the meat of it. Is essentially that if you're permitted, you can call in, you can carry your weapon concealed in another state. So if I lived in Nevada where I had concealed weapon permit, then if I went to Las Vegas, came to L.A., then I could carry legally, right? Correct. Here's my issue. This is a question and an issue. I'll do the issue first. My issue is that there are uneven state requirements. Mm-hmm. Every state has basically the same requirement or the same laws in driving a car. Everybody understands how to use the brake, and you got to take use a steering wheel and signal before you turn, all that stuff.
Drive
right?
on the same side of the road.
We drive on the same side of the road, et cetera. Right. So when I'm in Pennsylvania tomorrow driving around, I'm not going to be really out of my element. There's a certain standard that I had to meet in order to get my license, just like everybody in Pennsylvania did. There are certain states, in California, people don't think you can get a concealed weapons permit. You can get a concealed weapons permit in California. Pretty much the only counties that you're not going to get one is if you live in San Francisco County or you live in L.A. County. Other than that, you're going to be able to get one. But like Orange County, California, for those of you not in California, that's where Disneyland is. Orange County, California has a 16-hour requirement. You have to undergo 16 hours of training, most of which is in the classroom. But there's also a component where you have to fire the gun and you have to shoot a minimum qualifying score to make sure you know how to operate a gun. There's other states, I think it's Wisconsin, you take a 4-hour class that doesn't require you to fire a gun at all. And there are people running around that state who have concealed weapons permits who have never fired a gun in their life. I don't want that person carrying a gun next to me at Walmart, or wherever, That's my issue with that, is that we have these uneven requirements. Maybe this bill has something in it that's going to make a national standard. And if there is a national standard required, then that'll smooth that out, and then fine. Here's my other question, and the president himself actually made the parallel to driver's licenses. He goes, "Hey, your driver's license is good every place. How come your permit shouldn't be?" Well, a lot of states issue non-resident concealed weapons permits. So I can get a concealed weapons permit from Utah and never have to set foot in the state of Utah.
Correct.
I can get one for Florida and be in Wisconsin. And all I have to do is pass the test, take the class from someone who's authorized to be a trainer for that state. And I don't have to, not only don't I have to be a resident of the state, I don't even have to have ever been to the state. But with a driver's license, that's not how it works. Yeah. You must be a resident of that state to get a driver's license from that state. There is no me getting a Florida driver's license through the mail. I have to be a resident of Florida, right? And then when I get my Florida driver's license, I'm supposed to turn in my California driver's license.
That's correct.
Because it's a home state requirement. So my question is, are they going to do that with this? If they make the national reciprocity, will we now see the end of out-of-state licenses? And if that happens, and everybody who in California, or everybody in L.A. specifically, who was getting happy about this, it's not going to change much for you, because it could be that your Utah CCW permit or your Florida CCW permit is not going to be valid anymore, if they really do the driver license parallel.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we at CCW Safe and personally, of course, we're advocates of concealed carriers and permits,
right?
But we're also advocates of training.
Sure,
the
absolutely.
16 hour minimum. We think they should do that and beyond. I mean, it just doesn't seem like enough when you don't put time behind the firearm. And,
right.
And it's important to do that, to learn how to even defend the firearm. No one ever does that.
Yeah, it would be interesting to me to hear your comments beyond, I don't want to be next to that guy at Walmart.
Right.
What do you mean by that, and what are you worried about?
Well, I'm worried about a person, just like if you didn't have to drive a car to get a license, if you never had to take a driver test, and now I'm going to let you get on the 405 freeway and drive. I don't want to be in traffic next to that person either. Mm-hmm. I don't want that person to be drawing that gun and waving it around and not understand how to fire that weapon accurately, how to handle it properly, you know?
Not that they're going to rob the store.
No, not they're going to rob the store.
React
but if somebody else robs the store, I don't want them shooting me instead of shooting a robber because they ain't never handled a gun before. That's the problem. Sure. So we have a caller, actually. Caller, what's your name? Where are you calling from?
I think it's me. It's Roger Rod. Is that me? I'm up.
That is you. It is Roger Rod. How you doing, man? So we've been discussing that and the nationwide CCW thing. We haven't gotten to the Michael Slager verdict yet, but
I've been listening to the CCW conversation. You're talking to somebody that is carrying in 41 states now. I have a CCW in California and also Nevada, which gives me 41 states as total. So I do understand it, and I'm absolutely in accord with you on this, George. There is not enough training involved, nowhere near. Remember the classes we had to take in the academy, executive decision-making, etc.? There's none of that.
Right, exactly. And I don't expect people to be trained to the level that police officers train. Average citizen don't have time for that. Okay, I understand that. But 4 hours, and you don't even have to touch a gun, or fire a gun, rather, and you get a permit, I mean, that to me is a training standard is so far, that is 1/4 of what Orange County, California requires. And it's just not enough, man. Well, and see, Roger, in your case, you'll be fine because you have a permit from your home state. But there are many people who don't have permits from their home states, and they wanted to be covered in 41 states, so they went out and got others. You'll be fine because when this passes, and I believe it'll pass because it's gone through the House, it's going to go to the Senate, which is heavy 2A favoring Senate, and then it's going to go to the president who made a campaign promise that he was going to sign it, and this is easy enough for him to keep. It's just going to sign it,
right.
But you'll be fine, Roger, and people in your situation will be fine because you have one from your home state. Now, the other ones are probably not going to be valid anymore, but it doesn't matter because your home state one will be good all over the country. But you also come from a state where we take firearms training very seriously and don't just let you have a permit after 4 hours of training and no qualification standard.
So I'm somewhat lost. When you say I'll be fine, what do you mean? I'll be able to carry in California, but what about someplace like New York?
You'll be able to carry everywhere. If this passes, you're going to be able to carry everywhere because you'll be covered under federal law. Just like, Stan and I are as retired peace officers, we're covered under HR 218, which means we can carry anywhere in the country. I've carried my gun in New York City before. And the only way you could get away with that is if you're a cop, right? That's basically, under HR 218, because the California CCW, as of today, only gets you handcuffs in New York City. But once this passes, and I'm sure it'll be a done deal. It'll probably pass before this year is up. I think that then you'll be able to carry wherever you go.
You mean before 2017 or 2018 is up? Before
2017 is up. There's no reason for this not to move pretty quickly. I mean, it's going to go to the Senate, but I don't see it being held up there really. And then the president, again, as soon as it hits his desk, he's going to sign it. He's already, he's got no reason not to do that.
That'd be interesting.
I hope you're right.
Well, we'll see. And hey, man, this is just proof that even a broken clock is right twice a day. He'll sign this, and it'll all be good. But I'm just again concerned, and you know what the qualification standard we had, and I know that you don't want to be standing in Walmart, or if I'm in Walmart and somebody robs it, I hope that I'm behind the guy with the 4-hour certificate and not between him and the robber.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
You're really kind of the lowest common denominator. You're talking about the lowest level necessary to get a permit is the one that in some ways becomes the standard because those people go everywhere.
Right. Exactly. So now, what's the point of Orange County requiring 16 hours when somebody with a 4-hour permit can just roll through and carry there anyway? I mean, it's terrible. I really hope there's some training standards that come along with that. But what will have to happen is something will have to happen. And, of course, the media, whether the left or right media, is going to have their agenda, and they're going to push it, and they're going to really make a big deal when something happens. Mm-hmm. And it ain't if. With that many people carrying, it's when. But you're also going to see private venues really start enforcing their right to allow you to carry or not carry on their property. Because as anybody who's got who owns a space, a venue or whatever, can say you can carry there or not, and your permit doesn't mean anything if they don't want you to carry there. You have shopping malls that don't recognize your CCW, that don't want you carried in concert venues and whatever. So I think you'll see more of that. In California, we don't really have to address it much because you don't have that many people carrying, at least in L.A. You know, not in L.A.
Since there's only 20 of them, you must be right. And one of them belongs to Charlie Sheen. That's a good choice.
Oh, wow. That's amazing, man. That, never mind. There's a joke there, but I'll leave the jokes to you, the comedian.
Well, the fine officer
Roger.
that is running this show, Officer George Holt, once said it to me best when I applied in Los Angeles and I got declined naturally. And he said, if the day ever comes that somebody gets an LA CCW, it will be delivered by a leprechaun riding on top of an acorn. Or a unicorn.
Unicorn, yes. That was my line, a unicorn. That's
I
right.
never forgot it. Dead on the money.
Yeah, absolutely, man. But, you know, those things are very rare. They're like hen's teeth rare, right? But they exist in California, just not in L.A. County, you know.
The best plus that I can see out of this, if it were to pass, would be watching the steam coming off of Dianne Feinstein and Nancy Pelosi's skulls. That would be the best part.
Now, speaking of things that make people angry, as you know, former South Carolina police officer Michael Slager was sentenced today. And Michael Slager was the officer who killed Walter Scott. And his murder trial ended in a mistrial. And then the feds came down on him. And, well, I'll let the video tell the rest of it. I'm not going to spill the whole thing. But we have a video where we're going to talk about the Walter Scott / Michael Slager situation. And there was a development in that whole situation today.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it.
Case making national headlines. Former police officer Michael Slager now sentenced for the fatal shooting of an unarmed black man after a traffic stop. Here's ABC's Steve Osunsami tonight.
The former South Carolina police officer in this alarming cell phone video is headed to federal prison tonight for 20 years, one of the longest sentences ever handed down to an officer in a racially charged shooting. In court, families on both sides broke into tears as the judge sent 36-year-old Michael Slager away. From the beginning, he claimed self-defense.
I fired until the threat was stopped.
But today, Judge David Norton refused to believe this, saying Slager shot an unarmed man in the back as he ran away.
My soul is rejoicing right now.
The family of 50-year-old Walter Scott told Slager they forgive him for everything. Slager says he's grateful, telling them, I wish I could go back and change that day.
I accept it, and we want to move on.
There are no winners here. One man is dead and another is leaving behind a young child as he heads to prison. Slager's team has 2 weeks to decide if they'll appeal. David?
Steve, thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel.
All right. So that's the case everybody remembers. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I was amazed that the first trial ended in a mistrial with the video, given the video evidence. But it did, okay? And now that officer is been sentenced to 20 years, which federal time is what? He's going to do what, 80% of that?
85 at least.
He'll do at least 85% of that. So then, so he's going to do what, about 18 years, probably 18 and some change, 19 years. At 30, so he's 36, he'll be 55 years old when he gets out. Yeah. But he's going to get out. It's you know, he's still got his life, and you know. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, man. This is one of those things that I don't know. And Don, I didn't follow it because I thought it was a slam dunk. Yeah. Okay, so I didn't even bother to watch the trial because I'm like, I don't know what we're going through this for. This dude's done.
It was one of the worst ones we've seen in the past 10 years.
Yeah, it was so bad that even I do not know one police officer who tried to justify that in the slightest. Mm-hmm. And usually guys got excuses. And they're going to say, oh, no, he could do this for that reason. And I'm guilty of that sometimes, too. Mm-hmm. But nobody would put a stamp of approval on what happened there. So I figured it was a done deal. So imagine my surprise when it came back. There was a mistrial because they couldn't reach a guilty verdict. I mean, but so as a trial attorney, did you kind of predict that, or did you kind of see that was?
I'm with you guys on that. To me, and I'm looking for a way, you know,
right.
in my mind, right. What could I do with this? How could I help this man navigate this? And the video the video tells a story. It doesn't tell the only story.
Right.
But when you look at that video, the visceral reaction to Walter Scott trying to get away and being shot several times leaves you with this feeling that this guy is committing a crime.
Correct. Well, absolutely.
Objection, counselor. Let me get a word in here.
Jump in, Roger Rod.
Okay, of course I have to jump in. There is really no other side to the story, because the simple fact of the matter is I know police training, and there's not a single police academy I know of in this country that would have even given him the right to clear leather on a fleeing misdemeanor. Mm-hmm. He couldn't even clear leather legally. And then to empty his magazine into him, sorry, there's nothing other than murder.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. That's why I didn't understand how he even had the balls, the temerity, to try to mount a legal defense of that. Because I'm thinking, dude, you just need to say, hey, I tripped out. You know what I mean? And part of his defense, or not part of his defense, but part of what was said, I guess, in his sentencing was that he had experienced a temporary break from reason. Wow. Okay? Which clearly...
Well, that's better than his dog chewed up his homework, but it's not far off.
Well, now, when you're talking about a criminal prosecution, you're talking about typically degrees of homicide. You're talking about different mental states, different intents, before he's guilty of first-degree murder. And that's the impression you get.
Right.
He has to have decided to kill that man and proceed to do it.
Right. And
did he have the
premeditation? And that's what was missing here, clearly, is that he didn't appear to have any premeditation.
Doesn't it look a lot more like the term would be depraved mind, a guy that essentially snaps, evil intent, hatred, spite, what have you, loss of control, much more than gross negligence, much more than even heat of passion.
But in trial, you don't say that. In trial, you get up there and you say, well, I fired till the threat stopped. And you're trying to act like this dude was Dillinger or something. Yeah. You know what I mean? That was the problem, is that he couldn't even go with that. He's trying to dirty the victim up by saying, hey, he was a threat to me, and I followed my training, which is what he said, and I fired to the threat. Stop. But, now let's touch on this. And I know, Roger, you've been waiting to jump on this one. We are not having this conversation had Walter Scott cooperated. And we always say, that's correct, comply now, complain later. Yes. Okay? Had Walter Scott complied, we wouldn't even know who Walter Scott was. We wouldn't know who Michael Slager was. And Michael Slager would still be pushing a police car around Charleston, South Carolina. Mm-hmm. However, that does not in any way justify what happened to Walter Scott, right? Correct. Roger, you there?
Of course I am. And I can't just jump over to this before I do say, at least to John Q. Citizen, all due respect to the counselor, that you can discuss degrees of homicide all you like in a courtroom. That is the legal system. But in the mind of the public, that is not justice. The court should be, in the minds of the public, a place where you determine guilt or innocence. Mitigating factors don't work for dead people and the ones you have to tell that their loved ones are dead. It doesn't work. He knew better. If it was your son and you weren't defending him as a client, you would feel precisely the way I do and the way his family does. Now, that's item one. Item two, you're absolutely right when you say that what he did by running is the evidence that has to get through the skulls of everybody, that not just people of quote-unquote color, everyone that watches TV and movies. This is what they see every day on television and movies. When the police say stop, you run. Either get in the car, you run, or both. And they think this is what's supposed to happen. People emulate what they see on those screens, and this has become standard protocol. They put car chases on TV and happy hours around it. Somebody has to get it through the mind of the public that when you run from the police, good things are not supposed to happen to you.
No, absolutely not. I mean, and I said this, and this is rather cynical, and I would never say this if I was still an active police supervisor, but I am not. So I will say that we saw an increase in police pursuits, particularly these deadly vehicle pursuits, when we stopped whooping people's ass when we caught them, okay? And I know that may be not what people want to hear, but it used to be that if you ran from the police, when you got caught, you had an ass whooping coming, okay? Mm-hmm. And if you were a career criminal, hardened criminal, a repeat offender, in that fight or flight decision you had to make, you had to decide if this officer is going to be able to catch me or not. Am I going to be able to get away? Or do I want to go to jail, or do I want to go to jail with a whipped ass? Mm-hmm. And and it may have been unlawful, may have been unethical, but you saw less people getting in vehicle pursuits and taking off because they knew, especially certain police agencies that had a reputation, that when you got caught, you were getting your ass beat. Okay? And so we stopped doing that not too long after Rodney King. And if you look at the timeline, you'll start to see a precipitous increase in the amount of vehicle pursuits. And they would always say, why are these vehicle pursuits so popular now? It's almost every night on TV, there's a vehicle pursuit. Why is that happening? Nobody wanted to get on the news and say it, but I'm going to tell you why it happened. Because police stopped whipping people's ass when they caught them. Okay? Back when that was happening, you saw less vehicle pursuits. It was a factor in the decision making. It's not anymore. And I'm not saying it was right. I'm just telling you, if you want to ask, why do we see so many vehicle pursuits? It's because the ass whoopings don't come standard issue no more. So at least that's how it was in L.A.
I'll jump in and say that you're not saying it was right, but I'll say I will. Yeah, I will say it's right. Yeah, you're right from the cops. You're supposed to get your ass beat. I don't care who you are. And if you're driving around at high speed, risking people's lives that I care about, starting with mine and everybody I love, you're a clear and danger menace to the public. And as far as I'm concerned, take them out. I already don't care. And, you know, every time I hear these arguments about they want to change the Second Amendment, that's the only amendment anybody ever wants to put under attack. How about the rest of the amendments? The argument is, well, the Founding Fathers never meant for us to have, quote-unquote, assault weapons, which we are actually just rifles.
Right.
But let's discuss the fact that also the Founding Fathers did not mean for due process and presumption of innocence to include when you see somebody carjacking on TV or plowing into a crowd, getting out and screaming, Allah is great, that you all of a sudden have that due process and presumption of innocence coming your way anymore. That wasn't the case when they wrote the Constitution. They came from a country where the royals could lock you up and throw you away the key with no trial. Mm-hmm. That's why they wrote it that way. They didn't mean for a few hundred years later for this idiot show we have now.
Well, you know, the problem with messing with the Constitution is once you got the hood up on that thing, people want to start tinkering around with everything under the hood. You know what I mean? So you're not going to stop at the second or the first.
But the only one they're always happy to do that with is the Second Amendment. The rest of them are all sacred. They never touch them.
Well, right. Nobody. Well, you know, I think there's an attack on the First Amendment right now. It's just kind of low key. But right. The Second Amendment, for sure, the Second Amendment has been fair game every time something happens. But, you know, people are saying that there's people dying because of the Second Amendment. Nobody's dying because of the Fourth Amendment or because of the First Amendment, even because of the Fifth Amendment. Nobody's dying because of all that. So that's why you hear that. But again, they got to be careful, man, because once that hood is up on that thing, we're going to start messing with all kind of stuff, you know. So we have to be careful with that. But Roger Rod, now for people who don't know, Roger Rod is a former police officer who is a comedian, and you've got a tour coming up, don't you? Are you on tour now?
I'm going to be in Omaha. I'm taking off tomorrow. We're doing the Blue Lives Matter comedy tour in Omaha, Nebraska at the Ralston Center. David Raybon, Cliff Yates, and myself. Thanks for giving me that plug. And also, thank you all for putting up with me. I'm an Oma maniac, but that's why I come on the show.
Well, Roger, I appreciate you calling in, as always, man. Hopefully you can come back either next week or week after and come down and sit down with us, and we can enjoy some of your mania in person. So, Raj, again, thanks, man, and stay warm in Nebraska. I don't know why you decided to go to Nebraska in December,
it's only
but
17 degrees there tonight, but tomorrow it heats up to 22.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, all right, man.
Thanks very much. Thank you all, gentlemen.
Thanks again, man.
Night.
All right.
You know,
hey, go ahead.
Before you jump off of that, you know, you talked about, because I too grew up in the '90s as a police officer. And you're right. I mean, we were more hands-on.
Yeah, definitely.
But what I saw as I moved into my career, especially as a trainer, you know, within 10 years, the hiring process kind of evolved into something that I disliked. And
sure. I was having a conversation with friends about that today, actually. Yeah.
They stopped hiring cops.
Yeah.
And they started hiring police officers. And it's a distinctive difference. And, you know, I started running into these young college students that they fought on PlayStation as the only time they've ever had a fight.
Oh yeah.
So the force actually increased because they didn't know what else to do, and especially when they don't have the physical, you know, fortitude and means to defend themselves, let alone anyone else.
Oh my God.
They go to the gun faster than anything.
Marshall McLean, if you're watching, call in, because this is exactly what we were talking about today. Okay. Marshall McLean's been on the show a bunch of times, and sometimes he calls in. But and Jeff, if you're watching, this is exactly the conversation we had today. Yeah. That's amazing, because that's exactly what we were talking about earlier today. Yeah, incredible, man. We got to do something different. Mm-hmm. You know, we got to do something different, because what's happening now is not working. So listen, folks, we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to talk about the Kate Stanley trial verdict. and we're going to just talk about self-defense laws and legal strategies, et cetera, when we come back. So we'll be sitting right here. See you in a minute. All right, and that was Shadrach by the Beastie Boys. I just heard that. I don't know how I just heard it. It's on the Paul's Boutique album. I don't know how I just heard it like a month ago, but I love that song. Okay, so we have a case that is rocking the country with people being upset. And some of you may know that in San Francisco, California last year, we had a young woman named Kate Stanley who was walking an iconic Fisherman's Wharf with her father, arm in arm with her dad as they paint the picture. Mm-hmm. And she was hit by a stray gunshot and shot in the back and succumbed to her injuries, and she died. And they located the person who fired that weapon, and he was an illegal alien who had been deported a bunch of times, mm-hmm. and he was charged with murder. And he had his defense or whatever, but we got the verdict on that a week ago today, actually, but it was right before we started the show, so I didn't have time to incorporate it into last week's show because my playlist, so to speak, was already full. Mm. But I want to talk about the Kate Stanley trial now, and I'm glad I did wait because now I got a trial attorney here to kind of maybe shed some light on it too. So we're going to play that video on the Kate Stanley trial verdict, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Well, Anderson, we know that just within the past few minutes, the jury has acquitted Jose Inez Garcia Zarate of murder, first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and involuntary manslaughter. Now, this is the case that really brought the term sanctuary city to the forefront. You had this person who had been deported 5 times to Mexico. He would have been deported a 6th time, but San Francisco, a sanctuary city, does not comply with federal immigration detentions and therefore let him go. Now, many thought that this would have been a slam dunk case for the prosecution. You had Kate Stanley, who was walking along this pier, this well-known pier in San Francisco, July 1st, 2015. She's with her dad, and a gunshot rings out. Within an hour, police had their man, but the defense did a very good job in poking holes in the prosecution's theory. Remember, the prosecution said that this was an intentional murder, that you had this person point a weapon at Kate Stanley and pull the trigger, but the prosecution obviously doing an effective job in raising reasonable doubt. For one thing we know, Anderson, is that the bullet ricocheted before striking Kate Stanley. That obviously helped the defense. Also, the defendant had very little gunshot residue on his hands, which some would argue would show that this was unintentional. We can tell you that the defense claimed, as improbable as it seems, that Garcia Zarate was just sitting in his chair there along the pier for about 20 minutes, looked down and saw an object. He said the object was wrapped in cloth and unwrapped it, and that is when the gun went off, and the jury apparently bought that story, Anderson.
Okay, so, I think that in this case, as in another case I'm just going to touch on, we're not here to relitigate any cases that have already happened, but I do want to talk about this. This case sent shockwaves, and people are furious, and I'm watching it all over social media where people are saying, oh, my God, what kind of system is this that he could not be found guilty? In California, your laws are so screwed up, etc. But I think that there was the way this was covered by certain parties in the media, it appeared to be a much more slam dunk case than apparently it was, I think. Mm-hmm. And people had this expectation that, oh, my God, this is a travesty, that this happened, this was murder, and this person's going to go down for it. And when it didn't happen, you saw shock and outrage. And I saw an opinion piece on this the other day, and I made a comment on a friend's Facebook post. And this is where Don, your expertise comes in. It was said, and a comment I made was, conservatives now have their George Zimmerman verdict. Because people on the other side of it expected that, based on thinking the evidence was a lot stronger than it was apparently, expected a certain outcome. And when that didn't happen, people were outraged. Mm-hmm. But there were other people saying, hey, yeah, but if you look at this, and did you watch a trial, and did you look at all this that was brought up, and there are people who were fully expecting George Zimmerman to be found not guilty, and I didn't see anybody defending Mr. Zarate, but people, the trial watchers were not surprised that this verdict went this way, and I think maybe it's because the prosecution maybe should have gone for a different charge, than what they tried to get him with. Just like in Baltimore, they tried to go for depraved heart murder on all 6 of those officers. Mm-hmm. You could never reach that standard. So, I mean...
You heard the announcer in the video talking about a summary where the prosecution theory was first-degree murder, an intentional, premeditated decision to take someone's life, and then it's a ricochet.
Right, absolutely.
There's no witness to any of that other than it's a prosecution theory.
First-degree murder wouldn't even be if he shot the gun up in the air and it happened to land someplace and hit somebody, would it?
Absolutely not.
See?
Maybe voluntary manslaughter.
Maybe, but not first-degree murder. First-degree murder is he's taking aim toward a group of people, right, and happens to hit somebody and kills them.
There's typically 2 ways to commit first-degree murder. One is during the commission of a crime. You don't have to intend to kill someone if they happen to die while you're robbing the place.
Right.
The other one that requires premeditation, and it takes various forms around the country, but the bottom line there is you have to have made the decision to kill and reflect on it. It doesn't take very long to make that decision often, but you have to go through the process where there's some reflection involved. So you've decided to kill somebody, and you set about to do it. If you miss, it's attempted first-degree murder. If you succeed, it's first-degree murder. It's the highest crime in the country.
Sure, absolutely.
It's punishable by the death penalty.
Right, and not much else is. So absolutely. So I think that, in a case where his defense was it was an accident, and you don't have any way to prove that it wasn't an accident, really, I think that was a tough reach, man. Now, let me ask you this. Do you think, had they gone for voluntary manslaughter, had they tried a lower charge, you might have seen him plead out, and it may not have even gotten to this far. But if you're trying to put first-degree murder on a dude and he's saying it was an accident, yeah, he's going to fight that. Right. Or at least he should. Mm-hmm. At least he should fight it. And the same could be said of the Michael Slager deal, because Michael Slager was sentenced to 20 years for second-degree murder, but I think they charged him with first-degree murder initially, right, on the state level in South Carolina?
Let me track through that just for a second. I think that's an important point. In state court, he was on trial for, I think it was second degree. It could have been first-degree murder, but the jury hung, meaning they couldn't reach unanimous decision, and the judge, after a couple of days, maybe 2 or 3 days of deliberation, decided they were not going to be able to reach a verdict. They were hung, and he declared a mistrial.
Right.
The state authorities vowed to retry him.
Yes.
And then I lost track of it because then he was charged in federal court, indicted for a civil rights violation. It's actually very different than murder. It's a criminal civil rights violation under color of law because he was a police officer.
A policeman, on-duty policeman, right.
So when you commit that crime, the sentence then is largely driven by the underlying facts. And at the sentencing, in Michael Slager's case, the judge basically had to decide, was he sentencing him for voluntary manslaughter or for second-degree murder?
Right.
Because as the judge processed that under this umbrella of a civil rights violation, that would do a couple of things. The biggest thing is that would drive the sentencing guidelines in the federal system. And as a result of that process, I read an interesting clip that the probation officer who had assessed the case and the background checks recommended a lesser sentence.
Really?
Yes, recommended.
Well, he's not going to have any criminal history. If you look at the average police officer that comes before the court of law in a criminal matter, as the defendant in a criminal matter, they're not your typical defendant.
Correct.
You know, that court has that same day seen people with lengthy criminal histories and who don't have strong ties to the community, and who don't own property and all those other things that they look at when they're deciding if you're going to be a threat to society or not, right? That police officer is typically going to be sparkling clean. This is most likely their first ever brush with the law.
And unless there's a mandatory minimum involved, the judge is required by the Eighth Amendment, essentially, to an individualized sentence. The sentence the guy gets in front of him is the one that particular guy deserves based upon the totality of all of the circumstances. And when the judge looked at this case, rejected the idea that it was more voluntary manslaughter, but more second-degree murder, and sentenced him what I think is right around the same sentence that the guidelines recommended. At the same time, the prosecutor was asking for a life sentence. So the decision to impose that sentence was solely the judge's at that point. Michael Slager pled guilty. He didn't go to trial and lose. He pled guilty in federal court to a civil rights violation.
And that was on the condition also that South Carolina would drop their charge too, right? That's my understanding.
I don't know that, but that makes perfect sense to me. That makes perfect sense. Because there's no double jeopardy.
Right.
Legally, both.
Two different charges.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they can both go at them.
Sure. And then, so now you get done with your 20 years here in the federal pen. You don't get to go home yet. There's a van waiting for you outside from the South Carolina Department of Corrections. Now you got to go do the other part of your time. Right. So quite naturally, he didn't want to face that, or God forbid he does this one first and then go do that one second or whatever. So yeah, I can understand.
Part of the work as lawyers do is to set the stage so that when it's done, it's done.
Right, absolutely. And I think another thing, here's the other thing too. And this is how I didn't understand how he had the temerity to try to plead not guilty the first time.
Oh, wait a second.
Go ahead.
Everybody pleads not guilty.
Not everybody. Some people say, all right.
No, nobody pleads guilty.
Let me cut a deal.
No, not yet. No, everybody pleads not guilty unless they get a deal to plead guilty.
Right. So like at the arraignment, you're going to enter not guilty. We know that.
To get out of jail.
Sure.
Right. Some people plead guilty just to get out of jail. People probably because they can't make bail.
Absolutely, which is sad.
Innocent, which is a tragic.
We want to talk about that next. That's sad.
Thing.
Absolutely.
Every lawyer pleads not guilty.
But I mean, you're going to get into trial. Yeah. Then.
So what? What is Michael Slager going to do? Is he going to plead guilty to first-degree murder and guarantee a life sentence?
Or maybe even the death penalty if they have that in South Carolina.
Why wouldn't he roll the dice? Why wouldn't he take his chance with a jury?
Right. What was his incentive? Right.
Oh,
yeah,
of course. In federal court, obviously, it was a completely different scenario. He and his lawyers decided it was in his best interest to plead guilty. And it may very well have been. I was involved in a case where a corrections officer set up a murder in the sense that allowed an inmate in the cell with another inmate who killed him. And
really?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And that corrections officer was prosecuted for a civil rights violation like this. Mm-hmm. And was sentenced to life in prison.
Oh, wow.
Never touched the guy that died, and she got life in prison.
Well, you know what? Charles Manson never killed anybody either, and he ended up dying in prison. Hey, we have a caller. Caller, what's your name? Where are you calling from?
Good evening, gentlemen.
I knew it was you before you said anything based on the pause, because you always get the dramatic pause before you start. This is Willie Sweet Wonka Joe, who made the comment about the justice system being for the wealthy and being a branch of capitalism. How you doing, man?
Yes, George, you already know I got to take up an issue with you, George.
Okay, lay it on me.
All right, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can all hear you.
Okay, because, I got Metro PCS. Anyway, the thing, I'm sorry, man, I know you're on a different topic, but, George, you be switching up so many topics. I got to go back to what y'all was talking about before, right?
Okay, which one?
When you said, well, now, I don't know if it was you. I know it was a guy on the phone, but y'all was talking about how if you run, what did y'all say? If you run from the police, what happens?
Oh, you get your ass beat. At least you used to back in the day, not anymore.
All right. Let me
unless in
ask
South
you a question.
Carolina, then you could get shot dead, apparently. But I mean, back in the day, it was standard issue that you were going to get a thumping if you got caught.
What was the misdemeanor that Walter Scott had?
Walter Scott had warrants. He had outstanding child support warrants, and that's why he ran. He had multiple.
You can have.
Yeah, he had
multiple warrants for child support.
And that's why he ran. They think that, of course, we don't know because we can't ask him, but we think that's why he ran, is because he had misdemeanor warrants.
For how you got multiple misdemeanor warrants for child support? Like,
might have multiple baby mamas he didn't pay. I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, it's a sad situation, but I wish I could talk to Walter Scott and be like, man, what the hell are you thinking? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
If you work at Waffle House, you need to stop having unprotected sex, Walter.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Well,
but anyway,
that's no longer an issue.
I got to challenge you, George. Plus, shout out to POTUS for the background. It looks like an interrogation room up in there right now. You know what I mean? But I got to challenge y'all on this, George.
Okay.
If, let's just say Walter Scott, right? Take the image of the African-American male out of your mind. Let's just say Walter Scott was a 43-year-old Caucasian-American, right? And he was being pulled over in Brentwood, and he ran from the police. I'm not saying that you shoot him, but I'm saying if one of you pulled him over and saw he had misdemeanors, and he runs, if you catch him, I'm pretty sure you will catch him. He is a white man, right? When you catch him,
this dude, man, he's on it.
I'm just saying, when it comes to running, can't nobody touch the Kenyans. You know what I'm saying? Wow. Anyway.
Okay, go ahead.
When you catch him, are you going to whoop this white man's ass who's from Brentwood? He's a real estate investor, and his family is connected to the mayor's office. Are you going to whoop his ass?
Let me say this. When I worked in Watts, everybody, no matter where I ended up working, if I was assigned someplace else, I had a Watts mentality in terms of policing. I treated everybody the same. I didn't think it was right that people in certain parts of town got treated certain ways and certain people didn't. Either nobody gets their ass whipped or everybody gets their ass whipped. But that was me. I understand exactly what you're saying. There's a lot of officers who would not, back in that time, not have done that. That man would have been treated completely different because of where he was and who he was. I get your point. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So what you saying? So you would have whooped his ass?
Well, this is a hypothetical situation, and therefore it's unindictable. So I'll say yes. I'm just telling you, man, because you can't have a situation. To me, like I said, I always hated the fact, because I grew up in a different part of Los Angeles than I worked as a police officer. I grew up on the west side of L.A., and I had, neighbors who were attorneys and stuff, and so my neighborhood was quite different than working in the housing project. And the policing style was different, but I never liked that. I didn't. So you're probably asking the wrong guy. I know what you're saying, though. I get your point completely.
George, man, there's a psychological term out there that the scholars have come up with, and I don't remember the name of it, but it has something to do with like some type of cognitive perception that's automatically,
Cognitive dissonance, I think, is what you're looking for. Cognitive dissonance.
Is it? I mean, it's something like I'm a young black man, so like if I'm in the mountains of Georgia and I pull over at a mom and pop store and I see two white dudes in a pickup truck with a big-ass Confederate flag, my brain automatically thinks that, these dudes probably don't like me because I'm black or something, because I'm in the mountains. I'm in an environment of, the woods and mountains where white people live at, and I see white dudes in a pickup truck with a big Confederate flag, and without me even trying, my brain automatically thinks this way. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
And that's what I'm trying to say is that, black people have this, Asian people have this, Latino people have this, a lot of people have this, so police officers are no different, right?
Absolutely.
And originally I'm from New Jersey, and I know, growing up in my hood, man, I know that these police officers in my hood, East Orange, North New Jersey, the way they police...
Yeah. Well, you guys might know each other. Stan's from East Orange.
I am.
The way they policed us in that hood, man, they would not do that over there in Bergen County, man. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and you know what, he's right, because I'm from
Absolutely,
I'm from there, from Essex County as well, and I didn't like the police when I was growing up, and I became a police officer, but in the Midwest. But he's absolutely right. They would not treat them the same in South Orange as they would in East Orange.
Well, and it's not even just where you are; it's who you are. Because when I was in high school, when we would go to hang out in Westwood by UCLA, we knew that we weren't going to drive through Beverly Hills without getting stopped by Beverly Hills PD. Now, Beverly Hills PD didn't make it a habit to stop the kids who lived in Beverly Hills, but they would make it a habit to stop us. See, they could be tough guys with us, but when it came to residents of Beverly Hills, they were butlers with guns. So they couldn't be tough guys there because they'd get in trouble, but they could be tough with us because we didn't live in Beverly Hills. So I know what you mean. It's not just where you are; it's also who you are.
George, in high poverty communities, there's always a lot of crime. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So I understand that. You know what I mean? The police departments, the city hall, the mayor, everybody is like, okay, we got to target these areas because there's a lot of poverty. Automatically, there's going to be a lot of drugs and crime. You know what I mean? I understand that. But if me and my friends are just hanging out in front of a store as 15, 16-year-old kids, you know what I'm saying? And we dressed in hoodies and we got our pants sagging, right? And we in the hood, hanging out in front of the store, just talking shit, you know what I mean? Right? What's the difference between us and the white kids who are hanging out in front of the store over there in Bergen County? You know what I'm saying?
Well, the thing is that who's calling the police on them? Who's calling the police on them, though? That's the thing. Like you just said about people having a certain perception, you're more likely as a young black man wearing the hoodie and the pants sagging to have the police call on you for hanging out in front of the store than maybe the white kids in Bergen County.
George, it could be a situation where the police just drive through, they get out the car and be like, hey, y'all get the fuck out of here. You know what I'm saying?
Right, and they wouldn't say that to those kids in Bergen County. You're right.
Would they do that in Bergen County?
Right, they wouldn't say it like that for sure. You're right. Absolutely.
I'm just asking the question.
No,
hey, George, before I go,
listen, you already know the answer, though.
But, George, before I go, what happened to the Somalian cop, man?
Every time he asks this question. That's the one who shot the Australian yoga teacher in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. I forget her name now. His name is Mohammed Noor. I can't remember her name to save my life right now. But I don't know, man. We still haven't heard anything. I think you're probably going to, when something happens, it'll be big. So you won't even need to ask me because it'll be national news if they ever decide to put the grab on this dude. They better hope he don't disappear. You know?
All right, well, before I go, man, I'm going to let you know for the record that mistrial of that cop, man, me personally, I feel that was total bullshit. You know what I mean? Just me personally, man. And that's all I got to say, man. Y'all be easy, man.
All right, man. Thank you. All right. Now, earlier you mentioned about how someone without resources, sometimes people may plead guilty just to get out of jail, maybe because they can't afford to bail out, or because. And I had a friend who did this, and it was a minor thing. He got into a street fight with someone. It was his first ever arrest. Dude never even got a ticket before, and he got into a fight with someone, and he was arrested, and he spent like the weekend in the county jail. And even though it would have been mutual combat, he just took the plea to get out because they told him, hey, if you plead out now, you can go home. All right. And, after being in the county jail for 3 nights, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, it's Monday night, he's in court. This dude's ready to go home. And he's thinking, hey, it's going to be, it'll be probation and I won't have to deal with this anymore, but I can go home right now if I just say okay. He just said okay. But I told him when he called me when he got home, I'm like, man, you really probably should have tried to fight that. And he said, you know what? I would have been in jail for another 2 weeks. And maybe at the end of it, I would have been found not guilty.
Yeah.
But I would have been in jail for another 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And what about my life being on hold for that period of time? He says, I just took the L on it, man. So I imagine that does happen fairly often, because that happened to somebody who's very close to me.
We were talking about the, is it the Khalif? What's the Netflix movie? I think Jay-Z had part in it. But it was a young man out of New York City.
Oh, yeah.
And
Rikers, right?
And went up on the Rikers, over, some trumped up charges. And, Don and I were talking about it on the way down, because I despise bad people, just don't like bad people, criminals. But I'm not a fan of the bail system. No, not at all.
I was until about a year ago, and I started really paying attention to it, man.
And of course, in our business, we do pay attention to it. But,
right.
But as a cop, I didn't.
Right.
And it's just like, wow. I mean, it's just they really get us a percentage of, innocent people that have to stay in jail because they can't afford to get out.
Right. And that's the problem. Is the only bar there is if you can post this bail or not, is whether or not you get to go.
Correct.
Go home and live your life and not lose your job and keep your family intact and all that, is if you've got the money to put that up. Now, of course, we have own OR, we have own recognizance. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to see the bail system replaced with that, where everybody gets a chance to show how reliable and trustworthy you are, because there's no financial bar to that. You can be a rich dirtbag, or you can be a guy who doesn't have any money, but he's got a steady job and he's a pillar of his community, and that guy can be released on his own recognizance.
Correct.
I'd like to see everybody meet that standard instead of having to meet the money standard. Because, hell, there's people who post bail and bounce.
That's right.
That happens. There's people who've got, if you got enough money, you can post bail and bounce, and they'll never see you again. So, I know somebody did that in Mexico, who got caught up down there, posted bail because he had the money, and he said, I'm never going to Mexico again. Mm-hmm. So I'm not worried about it, So, yeah, you can, I don't know, man. It's sad when people are forced to choose between justice and their freedom. We got to do something about that, and I think there's been a repeal of that. In New Jersey, I think repealed the bail schedule.
That scenario that you're talking about, your buddy that was in the fight that was trying to decide about getting out or not.
Right.
2 weeks maybe when he goes back for an arraignment or preliminary hearing of some sort. He doesn't get out then.
Right. That's the other thing, right?
He's talking months before there's any kind of trial that would give him the outcome. So,
and who knows what happens in the meantime? You're in L.A. County Jail.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen in that couple of weeks?
Why couldn't he make bail? Too much.
I don't think he had the ability to do it, or his family didn't have the ability. And that's a smaller thing too. But I think it was also, you go through this and you try to get somebody to bring the bail down here, or you just say yes, I did it, and you go home.
Well, if you have the resources to hire a lawyer, probably going to have the resources also to make bail, but if you don't have the resources to hire a lawyer, then you're dependent on the indigent defense system,
right?
Which is overcrowded, overworked, well-meaning, some terrific lawyers in the system, but it might have taken them 2 weeks to come see your guy.
Right. Now what? Mm-hmm. Now dude's sitting there on a misdemeanor.
Yeah. The real tragedy is a compounding one, too, because now your guy has a record.
Yeah.
So how many times you can't get out of jail on a $500 bond that you wind up taking a plea to shoplifting that you didn't commit, or battery that you didn't commit, just to get out of jail so you don't lose your job. And then the next time you get arrested, or that haunts you in this day.
Or the job you want to get, you can't get now.
You can't even get an apartment now,
right?
If that's on your record.
We had a member recently that was, in 2015, he was arrested and charged with murder, one. And, even with that gentleman, if he didn't have the resources that we had, because they gave him a $500,000 bond. Uh-huh. And we also, because of our organization, we were able to negotiate his bond down.
Nice.
So we ended up paying $30,000, I believe that's what it was, right, Don? Something like that, where, but you can't do that as an individual.
No, average person can't do that.
You don't have the power, so you have to have resources behind you, resources and money. So, and that gentleman also he's never been involved in the crime. He had no idea anything about the criminal justice system whatsoever. I mean, his family, we had to kind of school them on what this was all about.
Sure, because he didn't have any exposure to it.
None whatsoever.
Now, we're talking about, I want to talk about self-defense, because we got about 10 minutes left. Mm-hmm. And Don, when we did the seminar last night, I know you touched on this, how important, like self-defense is not one of the, they say the burden of proof is on the prosecutor, right? Or on the prosecution when you're charged with a crime. But when you put forth a self-defense defense, isn't the burden of proof more on you then? Or do they have to prove that it wasn't self-defense? Because it seems to me like we're trying to build a case for self-defense, an affirmative defense, more so than you would have to do if it was any other crime.
Yeah, that's really an interesting comment, because in virtually every place in the country, the defense has the obligation to come forward with some evidence of self-defense.
Okay.
And once they do, then the burden shifts back to the prosecution to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it was not self-defense. Incredibly high burden for the prosecution. However, no one who is actively involved in a self-defense incident would just say, well, there's a little bit of evidence, I'm done. They're going to, the challenge of a self-defense case is to be sure that the jury understands the entire sequence, all of the circumstances, and I think that's a responsibility on the defense to put the absolute best case forward, which raises an interesting point, I think, from a criminal procedure standpoint. In a great many cases, criminal defendants go to trial, never take the stand, and are acquitted.
Absolutely.
Because the prosecutor's got to prove their case. If they can't, the guy goes home.
I don't think O.J. Simpson testified once in his murder trial, did he? I don't recall seeing O.J. testify, did he?
He didn't testify in his criminal case.
No, I think he did, yeah.
He just put the glove on.
Right, yeah, he did the glove.
And that was a demonstration. Yeah. That wasn't actually evidence, so he could not be asked questions.
Absolutely,
it was as if he was being asked to show tattoos or...
sure, it's a demonstration, no question.
That's not testimony, it's not Fifth Amendment, it's not that sort of thing. So,
well, okay, so then you do have the, like you said, the burden initially to show, hey, this is what happened and this is why I did this. Now, let me ask you this. How important is mindset? And I don't mean your mindset at the time that you stabbed, shot, or hit the person with a cement squirrel. I mean, this at the time... leading up to that, and here's what I mean by that. I belong to a Facebook group called Black Gun Owners Education, Black Gun Owners and Education Forum, and we were talking about people with these Punisher skulls that they like to put on their guns. Yeah, the skull and crossbones, the Grim Reaper that people like to put on their weapons, like to put on their clothing, like to put on their vehicles. Could you see a case where, and even if we're not talking criminal, but maybe on the civil side, because if you shoot somebody and kill them, I'm pretty sure you're going to get a civil suit from their survivors, even if you win a criminal, especially if you don't win the criminal side of it. Has that been introduced? I remember we had a police officer in, I think, Tempe, Arizona, who had an obscenity on his rifle that basically said you're screwed, but didn't use the word screwed. And they introduced that into the murder trial after he shot someone. Now, that wasn't the only reason that they were charging him. There was other things, but that was something that certainly didn't help his position, because they were basically showing like he had a hard on to smoke somebody already, like that mindset was already there, and that maybe he prematurely pulled the trigger. And so how important is that for people who, because I see it all the time, believe me, and I can't believe anybody would put anything like that on their guns, but people do it, you know, and like they don't realize that gun's going to be introduced into evidence in the trial.
The first thing law enforcement does now is go gather the Facebook pages, any kind of social media. They start looking for exactly that sort of thing. Is there a predisposition? Is there
that's the word, predisposition.
Is there a guy looking for a fight? Is there a guy looking for an excuse? In fact, you can't act in self-defense if you have initiated it or provoked it.
Right, exactly. And even my understanding is, even if you had the right to self-defense, if the other person concedes or gives, then you no longer have that, and you keep pummeling on them, then the right to self-defense actually flips to them now, because you're the aggressor.
Yes,
right?
And if you use more force than they did,
right, now
then you're now committing the crime.
Right, now they can go back to
self-defense. Use more force than you did, and pretty soon somebody dies.
Yeah. And predisposition, and you're talking about social media, because another question that I see, they got asked 3 days ago, hey, if you had to kill someone, if you had to shoot someone, do you think you could do it? And be honest. And I'm just sitting there like, man, let me see who's going to answer this question, because I'm not touching it.
Yeah.
Why on earth would you get on there and say, hell yeah, no hesitation, which I saw.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Why would you get on there? And a lot of people are very reasonable and said, well, if it came down to protecting my family, of course I would. And I'm thinking that's a great answer, but man, I'm not even answering that way. I'm just not saying anything.
We recommend to our members that they not modify their guns, they not put that kind of stuff on it, they not use specialized ammunition. They try to have what the police have, because that's accepted. It's standard in the industry. The trigger pull isn't 1 pound, and
right,
and
absolutely.
Right. Mm-hmm.
We do that, and we also talked about social media. I mean, the post, just like you said, where you weren't going to touch it.
Not touching that. You kidding me?
We tell them all the time that it's discoverable.
This trial that we had in North Carolina that Stan was talking about, there must have been 2,000 pages of printouts from social media.
Really?
Both of the deceased, who was a very loud, belligerent, hostile guy a lot of times, and didn't hesitate to point that out.
See? So it did, even though it wouldn't have done him any good either way because he's dead, still, now it's making you, from beyond the grave, you're basically undermining your own character and your own position.
Yeah, but I can tell you that it went a long ways for the defense to show who was the aggressor.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, because you're building a kind of a profile of the person, a psychological profile kind of based on. So when you're on social media, be careful about making threats of violence, and be careful about, posting all kind of pictures of all kind of stuff that shows that you have a propensity for that or a predisposition for that, et cetera. And don't take it from me. You just had one of the preeminent self-defense attorneys in this country tell you that. And if you don't take that kind of advice, then shame on you.
I wanted to tell you, George, thank you for letting me be here.
Well, thanks for coming, man.
I started law school at Loyola. Not very far from here. I went a couple of years.
Right? Cool.
And decided to do some other stuff. And this one was right downtown, 9th and Figueroa.
Oh, oh, really?
I don't know if they're still there, but
I don't know if they're still there either. But I know Loyola Marymount's up in by LAX now in Westchester.
He used to be a radio DJ here.
I could see that. Listening to your voice, I could get that now. Does that make sense now?
We go all the way back. I worked at Pasadena at a radio station that's still on the air. I was listening to it yesterday.
Yeah. Wow, man! I didn't know you had roots out here like that.
I love my time here, and that's why it's special to be back. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you were able to come out and hang out with us, man. And to have you here to be able to give the expert advice and to be able to really put it in a way that people can understand and have the legal gravity behind it. So it's not just that you went to law school. It's not that you've been a practicing attorney. You've been a successful attorney in this area. And I hope I don't have to say it on social media anymore because he said it once. So we have to keep having that conversation. Don't be stupid.
That's
okay?
Right.
He just told you. Get the Grim Reaper, the skull and crossbones, the Punisher skull. Get that shit off your guns, off your hoodies, off your cars. Don't be stupid.
Yeah, they'll use it against you.
They sure will. Now, Stan, if people want to get more information on CCW Safe and the services you provide, how can they do that?
Of course, go to ccwsafe.com. We actually just launched some new plans. So we have an ultimate plan now where we have civil liability coverage, which is $1 million dedicated, not like the other groups where it's a wasting policy where they take away from it. And we cover you and we treat you like family. It is the same resources and response that police officers have when they get involved in a self-defense shooting, and that's what we do for our members.
And you guys, and you and your partner Mike Darter, both being law enforcement officers, have a law enforcement background. You guys understand that uniquely.
Yeah, absolutely.
What that process is like and how that goes down.
Yeah, we've been sued as well in use of forces. Mike's actually taken a life and been sued.
Sure.
And that's how we decided to, deliver this to the citizens as well.
Well, and it's one of those things, man, you hope you never have to use it. But, if you have to, rest assured that you'll be in good hands with that. So, listen, I want to thank you guys for coming in.
Thank you.
And, I really appreciate it. I think it's a great discussion, and I hope people got something from it. If you have any questions or comments, or you want to have any follow-up questions, you can leave the comments right down here in the YouTube section. That's what most people watch us later is on YouTube. You can leave it in the comment section of our YouTube channel here. You can also send us an email to rightalongradioshow@gmail.com. You can like our Facebook page. A lot of people seem to get their information from Facebook, and that's the second most popular place to leave comments about past shows is on our Facebook page, Right Along Radio Show. You can follow us on Instagram at Right Along Radio Show, and you can follow us on Twitter, Right Along Radio. Until next week, I'm George Holt. I want to thank Stan Campbell and Don West for joining me. And this has been the Ride Along Radio Show.
That's the sound of the police. That's the sound of the beast. That's the sound of the police.